I think the important way to think about the permanent income hypothesis is if 20 years from now I did not have a job and I didn't have these great earnings that I have, would I still be able to live the same life, right? So if you think about it that way, you might find that maybe you don't even, you are not able to afford a holiday. And that's okay. So that's about having those honest conversations with yourself, and then you smoothen out your expenditure throughout your lifetime.
So in the early days, focus on increasing your capacity, your skill set.
Correct.
The money will come.
So yes,
in a sense,
so another way to put it is process over result. So the result is the money. The process is making sure that you've built capacity. So if you focus over process, the result naturally comes its own way.
Yeah. Would it be a concern if someone, over 40 going into the 50s continuously borrowing? Would we then say we need to have a conversation?
Yes, but that also depends on other factors. So sometimes it could be I'm asset rich, but I'm cash poor. So maybe there's a lot of investments I've put away. I've got houses, I've got bonds that are not yet liquidating, right? But I need cash now, for example, to pay for school fees. Say my child is going to university, so I need to cover that gap. So under those circumstances, it would then make sense, even at the age of 40 or beyond, to then be borrowing. But of course, then the understanding is that there's assets that are then going to cover for that debt that you are picking up through the course of your life. We tend to do what we've heard is working.
Yes.
So you tell me
it's
that
easier. It's just easier.
Yeah. So you tell me that you're doing Yango and it's working well for you.
We'll join the bandwagon.
Exactly. So you tell me, I tell 5 other people, and we're all doing the same thing. And economics, in a perfectly competitive market, what we're then doing is we're shrinking each other's margins.
I mean, it reminds me of that lady who starts a tomato stand at the roadside, and she'll have all the market, and everyone hears, oh, she makes money. And 2 days after, you just see there's an entire street.
I never subscribed to the theory that January, because of school fees, should be a difficult
what do they call it? January.
I think it only becomes that because December tends to be a period in which consumption does this and savings do this. Things like school fees should never be a surprise. I get medical shocks, there was an accident, and there's
nothing you can do about
there's nothing that you can do about it.
Hello, welcome to the Money and People podcast, the show that connects the dots between financial success and the power of human capital. Today, we bring to you Chileshe Moono, an economist who will talk about the aspect of something called Lifecycle Hypothesis. Chileshe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Okay. Just to get everything started, please tell us about yourself. Who is Chileshe?
Very difficult question, eh? Yeah, so I think you started it well. Economist, that is my profession, but it goes beyond that, right? I just don't consider it my job role, but it also filters it through into how I live my life. So I would say I'm an economist stroke financial markets enthusiast, and that's how I sort of model my life. Beyond that, I'm also a sports enthusiast, and a lover of our country, Zambia.
Oh, fantastic. At least someone is a patriotic Zambian. Yeah, and in terms of sports, which is your favorite?
Sport or team?
Start with sport.
Favorite sport, football.
Team?
Team, Real Madrid.
Why?
They're the best club in the world. Why wouldn't you think?
It's a farmers league. Anyone can play. Anyone can play in La Liga.
Yeah. Champions League?
Yes, because they spend half their time training. They just play Champions League.
So, that's a story for another day.
Yep. So if you were not doing economics, if you were not looking at finance, what would you be doing?
Yeah, so you've sort of answered the question, because if I wasn't doing economics, I would probably be doing something finance related. So coming out of school, I was always clear around what I wanted to do. So it was either going to be economics or some finance course, be it ACCA or CIMA. That was sort of the path. the, the decision really came down to what was affordable and practical at the time.
Yeah.
So that happened to be economics at the University of Zambia. So that was the direction. In another life, potentially I would have done SEMA. But yeah, so it has to be economics of finance related.
Okay. Do you ever think you'll go back to SEMA? Or are we now set? This is the path now.
I don't see them as two opposing fields,
Yeah.
by the way. So nothing stops me from doing a finance related course. I am doing some form of finance course, not necessarily SEMA right now.
Okay.
And the goal is to marry the two because they are quite intertwined.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. And coming to the topic of at hand, and for the
Yeah.
benefit of our viewers, what is life cycle hypothesis, and how does it explain how individuals plan their consumption, their savings, and their investments over a lifetime?
Yeah, so life cycle hypothesis is another way of describing a similar theory, which is a permanent income hypothesis. So, what these two sort of theories speak to is how human beings subconsciously end up finding some form of consumption level that they smoothen out through their life cycle. So maybe to simplify it, I would say through your life cycle from the time that potentially you start working up until retirement, you then define some sort of sweet spot in terms of consumption, and that will be different for different people, right? So if it's say 10,000 kwacha, and I'll qualify it at this point as in real terms, right? So you
Yeah.
strip out inflation and other factors that would affect your ability to consume, and you try to ensure that your consumption throughout your working life, right, from the beginning to the peak up until retirement and beyond that, stays within that level. So that's sort of how it then guides your savings patterns, your consumption patterns, and investment patterns to ensure that your consumption throughout your life is smoothened at that level.
Okay. And how can this understanding help individuals and corporates make better financial decisions across their different life stages?
Yeah. So, like I said, subconsciously, most individuals already do this, right? But there's also a conscious way in which
Yeah.
you can also achieve it, right? So, if you think about it practically, your consumption will be a function of your income today and whatever savings you have for when you're unable to earn income. So, in the definition, we spoke about whatever that sweet spot is and whatever that amount is, be 10, 20, 50K, and you somehow, through the course of your career, will find a way to ensure that you may earn beyond that at a certain point in time. You find a way to ensure that your savings are able to generate or grow to the extent that they carry you beyond your working life. So I guess it's really the most important principle when you're thinking about life beyond your current employment.
Yeah.
So after retirement, so to speak.
Okay. And from a career's perspective, how should individuals align their career choices and income growth with the life cycle hypothesis to maximize lifetime financial well-being?
Yeah. So I guess it goes down to principles, eh? If you understand that life is not a 100-meter race, but it's
Yeah.
a marathon, it then guides how you plan and think about earnings now, right? So many a time we as young people are faced with situations where you have an offer from another place that potentially gives you more earnings today, but we don't usually think about the sustainability of some of those earnings. So I could move to another form of employment today that maybe doubles my pay and then it stagnates beyond that. So what would have been the benefit of that? So understanding life cycle hypothesis is tied to understanding that life is a marathon and not a race. So you then understand, say, in the initial stages of your career, what you try to build is capacity and skill, which ensures that you have earnings for a longer period of time and allows you to then save up enough for beyond when you reach your retirement age. And you can also think about it from the perspective of if you generate certain skills, they can carry you even beyond what legal retirement would speak of, right? So even passively beyond your working age, you can still be earning income that supports your consumption.
So in the early days, focus on increasing your capacity, your skill set.
Correct.
The money will come.
So yes,
in a
so
sense,
yeah,
yeah.
so another way to put it is process over a result. So the
Mm-hmm.
result is the money. The process is making sure that you've built capacity.
Mm.
So if you focus over process, the result naturally comes its own way,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
if you're competent in what you do, people will want to pay you for it. Yeah,
They'll want to compensate for the services they're getting from you, which
correct.
is income, basically.
Yeah.
And what strategies can individuals use during their peak earning years to balance consumption, savings, and investments effectively?
Good question. So I would say step one is understanding what your peak earning would be, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that goes to having very honest conversations with yourselves. So let's take it back a bit to when we spoke about skills. So throughout your career or your earnings life, you need to understand where you rank in terms of your ability to earn. Because many a time we always say, "Oh, my employer is not paying me enough."
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough, right? And there are genuine cases where the skills and the compensation do not
They
really
don't
tie,
match, yeah.
right? But we need to have honest conversations with ourselves in terms of what our ability should be compensated with, right? So once you do that, you sort of have a very good feel to say, I've now reached my capacity or peak earnings, given where my skill level is. And at that point, then you would have also needed to identify what your permanent income is supposed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, in real terms, what amount of money would give you a certain lifestyle that you'd be comfortable with for the rest of your life. So once you identify those 2 points, it then allows you to then know at what point you should be saving, how much you should be saving, and what your expected return from your savings should be, so that beyond your earnings life, you are able to still have enough finances to consume the way you would like to consume.
Okay. And it's an important point which I picked up where you sort of have honest conversations with yourself and
Yeah,
say, I always imagine a place you ask yourself, if I was the employer, would I pay myself this much? How much would I pay myself if
exactly
I was the
right.
one who's the recruiter?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what role does the life cycle hypothesis play in balancing retirement savings with other financial priorities such as buying a home or funding education?
Exactly. So we're going back to, again, having that honest conversation with
Yeah.
yourself. So then once you've defined what your sort of peak level earning is supposed to be, you will, to an extent, have an understanding of how much skill you need to develop. And it also requires a bit of research. So ask around, right? If your peak level earning is 200,000 kwacha a month, for example, try and understand, try and see the people who earn around that level, see their level
Mm-hmm.
of skills. And this is not just hard skills in terms of education, but there's also soft skills that you need to learn to get to a certain level that allows you to earn that. So then you make better decisions in terms of understanding how much you need to invest into your hard and soft skills, at what stage of your life you're supposed to do that, so that it enables you to get to that peak level earning. And then beyond that, you then have a proper investment strategy. So I heard you mention owning a home, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
What should ideally be the case? If you're able to the extent that it's possible, there's nothing wrong with acquiring something such as a mortgage, right? And if you think about a mortgage, you say potentially your repayments are, say, for argument's sake, 15,000 a month, 20,000 a month, right? Seems pretty steep relative to where your rental costs
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
roughly right now. But if you model that over 20 years, and assuming that amount doesn't change significantly in terms of your payments, what would rental costs be in 20 years' time?
Could be way
Potentially
higher.
more than that,
Yeah.
right?
But the
So
house would eventually become yours.
there's that also as
Yeah.
well to also consider. So through the life cycle of paying off that mortgage, there's a painful process in the beginning, but over time, because cost structures are changing and your nominal income naturally will increase, you'll find that that initial cost smoothens out over
Mm-hmm.
over the cost of that mortgage
Yeah.
payment. So it's that level of understanding. Once you understand the permanent income hypothesis, you understand what your peak earnings are supposed to be and what your permanent income is supposed to look like. It helps you to then model how you invest into education and things such as homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how can individuals apply the hypothesis to make informed decisions? looking at aspects of asset allocation, risk tolerance, and things to do with long-term wealth creation.
Yes. Um, so the way the permanent income hypothesis sort of helps you understand some of those things is you now being able to understand where you are within that period of your earning cycle. So obviously, in your early stages of your earning cycle is when your risk profile will be much higher.
Yeah.
So you'll be willing to take on more risks because you have another 15 to 20 years of stable income to then help you absorb any losses if at all you've actually had that. What I would say is the best thing is to not treat this thing as binary, right? And to treat it as a spectrum. So at every point from the onset of your career, you must then have a savings plan. And you must then be able to allocate your savings in a diversified portfolio in terms of your investment profile, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So throughout the course of your career, you must take on some level of risk because then it ensures that you have good returns. Again, you must take on some level of low risk investments, such as bonds, for
Yeah.
example, right? They'll pay you lower interest rates, but over the course of time, they're safer level of investment. So you have a more steady cash flow
Yeah.
to then work with. So once you understand, in line with the permanent income hypothesis, where you are in terms of that period of your earnings, it helps you also to understand where your level of risk will be higher at one point than the other. Yeah.
Okay. And should individuals invest in additional education or skills training based on the hypothesis? How does this impact their lifetime earnings and consumption?
You should. But I guess the one qualifier I want to give around education is there's two ways to think about education. It can be a means to an end, or it can be an end in itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing education strictly to improve your skills so that you earn more, then it's definitely something that you should do in the earlier parts of your career so that you finish as soon as possible and you have a larger scope or time horizon to actually earn more based on your new qualification. But education is an ongoing process. So you can also learn new things or pick up new qualifications towards the end of your career that have nothing to do with your earnings capacity. Say I just, for example, have an interest in law all of a sudden, right? Nothing stops me, even in my late 40s, from doing a law degree.
Yeah.
Because it's an end in itself. I just want to know more about the law.
More about it.
And I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by it. So it's something that I can do. So once you also understand why you're doing the education, well, I guess the conversation now has changed a lot to everyone must have an MBA, okay, but why, right? Like there should be a plan. And once you have a proper understanding of the permanent income hypothesis or the life cycle hypothesis, it helps you to then work through some of those decisions.
All right. How does the hypothesis suggest individuals manage debt and consumption during different stages of life, such as early career and midlife and retirement?
Yeah, so debt would ideally be what you're picking up in the early stages of a career because the understanding is that your income at that point is not great, right? So in a standard case, what you have is early stages of a career, you earn very little, your income grows over time, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's not the case for everyone, right? Some people start high and maybe level off and come down,
Yeah.
which would not be the standard case, right? So, on average, what you expect is you're earning less and then your income grows over time. And yeah, so you're able to smoothen your consumption properly. So, say if your permanent income, according to your personal analysis, which everyone does subconsciously, right? But if you consciously say, in real terms, that's 20,000 kwacha, for example, and your salary is 10,000 kwacha. So that means that there's things that you won't be getting in the early stages.
Yeah.
So that's where debt comes in. That's why debt is not necessarily a bad thing per se. So it helps you plug that gap between where you want to be spending and where you're earning.
We are. Yeah.
And over time, what will happen is that your earnings will then grow even beyond what that spending level is, beyond that 20,000. And that's where now your savings need to start coming in. But you need to be clear about what that permanent income line actually is. Because what tends to happen is as our incomes grow, we're all guilty of then raising that permanent income, right? You are adding 4 holidays instead of one in a year because
The money is there.
because you can afford it. But I think the important way to think about the permanent income hypothesis is if 20 years from now I did not have a job and I didn't have these great earnings that I have, would I still be able to live the same life, right? So if you think about it that way, you might find that maybe you don't even you are not able to afford a holiday, and that's okay. So that's about having those honest conversations with yourself, and then you smoothen out your expenditure throughout your lifetime, so that you stay within that certain level. Right. So it's not a perfect science, right?
Yeah.
There'll be variations in between.
But in that case, would it be a concern if someone, over 40 going into the 50s continuously borrowing? Would we then say we need to have a conversation?
Yes, but that also depends on other factors.
Yeah.
So sometimes it could be I'm asset rich, but I'm cash poor. So maybe there's a lot of investments I've put away. I've got houses, I've got bonds that are not yet liquidating, right? But I need cash now, for
right
example,
now.
to pay for school fees. Say my child is going to university, so I need to cover that gap.
Okay.
So under those circumstances, it would then make sense, even at the age of 40 or beyond, to then be borrowing. But of course, then the understanding is that there's assets that are then going to cover for that debt that you are picking up through the course of your life. Where I would be concerned is if I'm not even asset rich at that point, but I keep borrowing, right? Then there's a challenge, right? Then there's a challenge.
Okay, great. And in terms of strategies, what strategies can individuals use to avoid excessive debt and build savings during their high consumption phases?
Yeah, so it's really financial discipline, right? Having those honest conversations with yourself. So earlier we spoke about what your peak income looks like. So again, based off your skills, that if we're honest with ourselves, we sort of always know where we rank, even within our own organizations, right? And by the way, skills is not PhDs and degrees and all those nice things. It's also the soft skills. I'm not saying those papers are not important, but it's also the soft skills that you pick up through the life of your career, right? So once you identify exactly where that level is going to be for you, it helps you to be more financially disciplined because you think about money differently. So you know for a fact to say, in 10 years' time, do I expect my income to double or triple, right? And based on the answer to that question, it will guide how you use your resources that you have now. So if you have that understanding to say, okay, I'm a fairly good career person and I'll probably end up middle to high management, that would be my ceiling, then I should probably start thinking about alternative sources of income outside my main course of work that will help to plug that gap in the future from a financial standpoint.
Are there such opportunities out there?
Yes, there's always opportunities. So in an economy such as ours, it's a growing economy, right? There's a lot of challenges that we all understand, but in those challenges lies the opportunity. So necessity is the mother of all invention. We know that. About 70+% of our overall GDP lies with SMEs. So that's telling you to say within that SME space, the non-big corporate space, there's a lot of opportunities. But it's also about being very, I guess, intentional and strategic about what opportunities you take up. Because some of the things I note, and I've also fallen into the trap sometimes with us, is we tend to do what we've heard is working.
Yes.
So you tell me
it's
that
easier. It's just easier.
yeah. So you tell me that you're doing Yango and it's working well for you,
We'll
right?
join the bandwagon.
Exactly. So you tell me, I tell 5 other people, and we're all doing the same thing. And economics, in a perfectly competitive market, what we're then doing is we're shrinking each other's margins. So over time, one maybe may not just work for me, right? It could be that. But also, even if it does, over time, the margins in that space shrink.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves all bloated in this one thing and not actually generating sufficient income. So it's about a bit of thinking outside the box and bravery. I think that's something that has sort of gone away from us, that entrepreneurial
Yeah.
bravery spirit. It's a challenge, I guess, to all of us, myself included, to think about how we can do a few things outside the box to generate income from those opportunities.
Okay. I mean, it reminds me of that lady who starts a tomato stand at the roadside, and she'll have all the market,
Yeah,
and everyone hears, oh, she makes money. And 2 days after, you just see there's an entire street.
correct.
And the worst part is, I don't have an issue with people joining her, but can you sell something else as well? You know,
Yeah,
if she's selling tomato, can you sell
yeah,
rape? Can these stands make a meal? So this one's selling carpenter, this one's chicken, this one is some kind of meal, and that sort of thing. But
yeah.
I feel like the creative juices are just don't seem to be there. We all want to jump into the easy stride, the tried and tested. We don't
Yeah,
want the first mover advantage. So
correct. No, spot on.
yeah. And how can the hypothesis help individuals prepare for financial risks, such as job loss, health emergencies, or market downturns?
So the unfortunate part is things like health issues and job losses. Sometimes you really can't prepare for them, right? And I'll give you an example. Say you're in the early part of your career, been working for 2 years, and there's a calamity in the economy. So like the load shedding that we had,
Yeah,
you work for this hotel chain, and it's just not making sense for them to continue doing the business, and they have to close shop. Luckily, I don't think we've seen many of those,
yeah.
but let's assume that that was the case. So in that early part of your career, the assumption is you'll be more on the borrowing side than the investing side. So how do you then balance and prepare for what comes afterwards? So it's a very difficult conversation, and there's no one solution to it. But I guess practical strategies that at least I've picked up through conversations with people is, for one, you must always have at least enough savings to carry you for 3 to 6 months
Yeah,
in case of anything, right? Because these are things that can happen. So now we're not even talking long-term savings, but just having that principle of, with every month, the little that you're earning, because there's also a biblical principle around, if you can't do it in little, then you won't do it
you won't
even
do
if
it
you
in
add a
many.
lot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So even if your salary is 5,000 kwacha, 1,000 kwacha, whatever it may be, can you save a 10,000, a 10 kwacha, sorry, from it, right? And see where that 10 kwacha takes you over time. So there are practical ways in which you try and save, and some principles around percentages. So some say you save at least 10% of your
Yeah.
income monthly, and you continue that discipline over time. So that can help, right? But it doesn't absolutely guarantee that if you had a health calamity, for example, there would be something beyond that for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking as you're speaking and being an HR person, I think perhaps we need to teach some of these things, especially at onboarding for new joiners, because someone just finishes university, they come in, any money is a lot of money
Yeah.
for them. But you show them that and they already start the discipline. Well, if your first salary is 2,000, your take home, and from your first salary, you're already saving up and it becomes a part of you, we might have more financially stable individuals going forward. But I think in our growing up stages, the one thing we were told is first 2 years, that money, just chew it. Just chew the money, enjoy it. After
Yeah.
2 years, then become serious. But then again, this is a habitual thing. So after 2 years, we'd have developed a habit of not saving and not investing. But I think from what I'm learning now, it should actually be the other way around. Start by saving, investing, and when you're older, you can play around with the money that you've made, especially the excessive income. And also the expectation is that you would have actually been a bit more wiser. So
Correct.
even in your decisioning, I think you make smarter decisions. Okay.
So back to process over result.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the process must be the foundation. So if the process will apply to a 1,000 kwacha, the result will only be 10 kwacha, but
it's
on 100,000 kwacha, it's now 10,000.
10,000 and it goes
So
on like that.
yeah.
So no, great. Um, does insurance and emergency fund play a role in aligning the hypothesis for long-term financial stability, especially in Zambia, if you take a Zambian context?
Yes, it should. And we see this more in the developed world. The hope is we can grow our insurance industry as well.
Yeah.
Because back to your point around calamities that speak to, such as health, for example, wouldn't it be great if there was a lot more adoption of insurance covers which help individuals that face those situations? So you're involved in a tragic accident and you can't perform your role anymore. Is there some form of insurance which covers you throughout the remainder of your life, for
Yeah.
example, right? We see you and I are both football fans. So in football, for example, footballers insure their legs
Yep.
and
Yep.
say, I'm insuring my leg for 100 million euros and I'm ready to pay this premium. Obviously, then the employer or the club would also subscribe to it. So these are things that show that you understand the risks of your environment and you are ready to pay what may be considered a painful premium in the beginning.
In the
But
beginning.
should that event take place, it can be such a sweet deal for anyone. So yes, it does play a role, and it's something that we should adopt more in this economy.
I think it comes back to creativity again. To what extent do we have insurance services? Think there's just car, fire, home, but is the sector really creative enough to then approach footballers, for instance, and say, okay, we can insure your legs? And knowing our terrain, we're more prone to a lot of injuries,
Yes.
broken legs and stuff like that. But you then wonder if is it just a risk they don't want to take, or is there, a possible lack of creativity in the sector?
So I wouldn't jump to the conclusion of lack of creativity. I think we need to understand that it's a growing sector as well
Yeah.
from an insurance perspective.
Mhm.
So we're only starting to see more players come into the sector now. We're seeing the actual what they're called actuaries, so
Yeah,
the experts in that field. That field is also growing within the economy. I think it's now a course at the University of
yes.
Zambia as well. So that adoption means you have more skills going into the sector to develop some of those products because they're very complicated and you need an expert to actually
Yeah,
do some of those things. So I would say now that it's growing to that extent and we're having more skills come in, I'm very hopeful
yeah,
and positive that is something that we'll see. My only hope is once those products are created, even us from a cultural point of view, are able to adopt them as well, right?
yeah,
Because even just taking up insurance for your car is something that we feel the cops should make you do as opposed to
exactly.
understanding the benefit
The
for
benefit, yeah.
yourself. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think from an attitude adjustment perspective, if we if we're not going to be arrested for it, we're not going to have it insured.
Exactly.
I think we're in that stage of assuming nothing will go wrong, everything is fine. And then when something goes wrong, we're so loud at complaining and blaming the whole
Exactly.
universe. Yeah. And how do behavioral biases like present bias or overconfidence interfere with applying the hypothesis? And how can individuals overcome these challenges?
So we go back to having some of those realistic conversations with yourselves. So there's nothing wrong with having faith and working towards becoming a CEO, right? For example, and earning this massive income that you believe all CEOs earn. But there's also that wisdom in understanding to say in every organization, there's a reason it's hierarchical and it's fewer people at the top.
Yeah.
Right. So if you haven't invested a lot in your career in terms of your skills, your education, and even your application, how hardworking you are, to then be, you use the word overconfidence, I would say unwise to expect that you will get to the mountaintop and earn all this money. So sometimes we have that overconfidence and spend, and because that will then guide where you set what that permanent income is. So if at a young age you set that permanent income at what an average CEO makes up there, and you're spending so much now, taking on so much debt, believing that you eventually
You'll
get
get
there,
there.
exceed, and your savings will be able to naturally smoothen out that consumption, then you've got it wrong. So, a practical strategy is just having an honest conversation with yourself. I think, again, like I said, subconsciously, we all always know exactly where we rank, but it's that honesty talk with yourself to say, okay, do I really believe I should be there? Right? And even if you believe, what steps are you taking to actually get there? And maybe being a bit more measured in how you spend until you get to that point. Because that permanent income can be a moving target.
Yeah.
So maybe I believe my ceiling is middle management. And now I'm already at middle management, and I believe I'll be senior management soon,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So yes, initially we said that shouldn't be too much of a moving target, that whatever that permanent income spot is, but there can be reasonable adjustments along the way once you note that you're ahead of the curve that you had initially set for yourself. Yeah.
Okay. And so somebody then has this conscious thought, honest conversations, and they start. Are there any strategies to stay disciplined? Because discipline is a problem. You will have the vision, go to the mountains and whatnot, and say, okay, I'm gonna go. But how do you maintain focus?
So that's a very difficult question because it's personal to people, right? So for me, I would say you need to have something that anchors you, right? And that's where, back to the principle of process over result, you need to, for example, you just do your job because you want to be the best, not because you want to be the best paid, right? Because once you have that in you, you will then be challenging yourself at every point to say, I don't think I'm there. You will be your biggest self-critic.
Yeah.
And over time, that forces you to work harder, to develop your skills more, and the focus is more around the job and not the earnings. And what you naturally find is, over time, the earnings start catching up and even exceeding what that process looks like. So what is your anchor? Right? Like, what is your goal? Why are you doing what you're doing? If the only reason you report for work and quote unquote work so hard is because you want more money, maybe that anchor is founded on the wrong thing, right? Because then the focus is more around the result, and you'll be more frustrated once that money is not coming. So,
Because
so
you're waiting for a salary review, which is
yeah,
beyond you. The company can
exactly.
say we're not increasing or giving,
Yeah.
2%. But if you're developing yourself, you could even reach a stage where you say, maybe the company just can't afford me anymore.
That's
But
also,
you have built yourself, and you can
yeah,
move to other places and that sort
exactly.
of thing. And also building yourself to such an extent, even when you come and say, okay, I'm leaving. If you've made yourself such a huge asset, the company would say, let's talk about this. How much more do you want? Can we work out something? So yeah, I think it's important to go back to the foundation, build yourself first, and let the money come. It will follow you. Don't.
Yes,
Sometimes
correct.
they say don't chase the money, chase the skill. The money will
Yeah.
just naturally gravitate. And from a policy perspective, how can corporates and policymakers use the concept to design better retirement plans, employee benefits, and financial literacy programs?
On the first part, I think the financial sector has done a good job, right, in terms of creating additional sort of retirement plans away from the regulated one. So I know most players in the financial sector already have that, and that is quote unquote an identification of a problem that existed way back, where
Yeah,
we had people in the financial sector who earned well and had access to cheap credit over time, and then when they lost the job, the drop was too dramatic.
yeah, yeah,
So institutions, to an extent, have started to. I wouldn't speak more around sectors outside the one that I'm in right now, but my hope is more of them are actually doing that. Where I think there's more work that needs to be done is around financial education, because this is something that I feel shouldn't be one off. You are off to see Avonga for this seminar that you do once a year, and you forget about everything
yeah.
that you learned, right? So I'm very happy to say that my current employer does a lot of that type of work, but it needs to be a push and pull. So the organization can do that, but you also need the employees to want to benefit from some of those programs. So that agenda is coming along quite nicely. We are seeing more private people doing this financial literacy stuff, and it's very good and it's very important because it's helping people understand. Because previously what you had is savings for people where I'm going to buy a plot and I'm going to build, I'm going to have flats, or I'm going to buy a bus and and the cab. So it's like even the investment options were very limited, right? We all thought in this bubble. But with financial literacy, as social media is also helping a lot. People are understanding that there are other alternative forms of investment. So there's fixed income. You can invest in bonds, right? You can invest in T-bills. You can also invest in assets outside Zambia. You can also, if you have the risk appetite for it, can invest in crypto. There's stuff like that. But what helps you is having that financial literacy, knowing what you are investing in. Because I think once you have some form of understanding, your willingness and risk appetite for it also increases. So I think we're trending in the right direction. But obviously, we all need to do a little bit more work to ensure that we are rising together as a community.
And no, I must say kudos to your employer. I think, taking that initiative, some of these things are not easy, and you find sometimes management might not even buy into it, at occasions, but the fact that they took that step and you as the end user is here appreciating it, I think it's a very, very commendable move by the employer, and we just urge them to keep up with it.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. No, great to his employers. Well done. And lastly, imagine, this is a scenario question. Imagine a 30-year-old professional with a growing family and a mortgage. How would the hypothesis guide their financial decisions over the next 20 years?
Okay, so my hope would be before getting the mortgage, you would have thought about it, obviously, and planned around how it's going to impact your consumption. Because what it will initially do is your mortgage costs, in more cases than most, would be more expensive than whatever your rental cost was previously. So you're going to have that initial shock that's going to impact your consumption. And that's where you now need to be clear around what the plan is. So you need to have that understanding to say, maybe no more holidays for the next 5 years. You're waiting for your income to then grow to accommodate more of that mortgage. And then over time, you start bringing back certain things within your consumption patterns to allow for it. You also have a growing family, right? And what tends to happen is almost as though people are shocked. Oh, now the kids need to go to school. And I never subscribed to the theory that January, because of school fees, should be a difficult month.
What do they call it? January.
January, exactly right. And this is not to demean or look down on anyone who's ever had that challenge, because I raised my hand that I've also had it. But I think it only becomes that because December tends to be a period in which consumption does this and savings do this. So
that's in November, Black Friday.
Exactly.
Black Friday is the beginning.
Exactly right. So it should almost, nothing should, things like school fees should never be a surprise. Right? I get medical shocks. There was an accident, and there's
nothing you can do about
there's
that.
nothing that you can do about it. But we sort of always know what the schedule is: term 1, term 2, term 3, when your children are going to university, and so on and so forth. So we must almost always be ready to take on the pain. So if it means the December passes, there was no Christmas party, and you didn't do anything, and everyone on social media was posting, that is also fine. But the idea is, in January, that worry will not be there. It will be a January.
And they'll be coming to you saying, "You're my last hope."
Exactly. And just to qualify my last point, this is assuming that, because obviously there's an understanding to say there's also homes where even with all those savings and no spending in December, they still have challenges. And so I'm not speaking to that situation.
Yeah.
I'm speaking to your scenario where there's a young professional who's obviously earning well enough, maybe not the highest of the market, but well enough, but is now shocked that there's school fees in January. So that's something that I think we can do better from a discipline perspective. The same way you think about permanent income over the life cycle, 20, 25 years, the same way you think about your spending pattern through the course of the year. So if you work for an institution that pays you a bonus, for example, in March, June, whenever that period is, you almost have to smoothen out that bonus over 12 months. So if it's 60,000 kwacha, you know you can smoothen it out as 5,000 kwacha every month. Or you could go on holiday and finish it at once. So there are those practical ways in which we need to think about smoothening our consumption and reducing those shocks that we tend to get.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, the one thing I've picked up, first of all, December usually the spend is on family and loved ones.
Yes.
And sometimes we tend to over exaggerate things. If I can, I want a fancy holiday, you want this. But there are times your family just wants you to be home.
Yes.
And sometimes just taking a walk, I've noticed sometimes some of my more memorable experiences are when I'll just wake up with the family, okay, shorts, slippers, there's a market there, they're selling mangoes. Can we just, take a long walk, we buy, we come back. Zero spend, but the utility that you're going to get from the fact that you did it with your family might even be greater than you going to, one of these known places and you are the buyer.
Yeah.
And you come home, you
exactly.
still have that emptiness. So I think sometimes it's looking at what makes you happy as well. And it's not always that you have to overspend to feel happy.
Social pressure.
I mean, as we grow older, and we have to sort of make ourselves immune. But yeah, no, social pressure is it's something. And maybe in addition to the financial literacy training, perhaps that resilience training also has to come in to help you resist social pressure and peer pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, any concluding remarks from you?
No, thank you for having me. I like that we're starting to have these conversations around spending patterns, the life cycle analysis, permanent income hypothesis, because I think there's a lot of things that, again, subconsciously we know, but we never sit down to consciously plan around certain things. So it's good that we're getting the conversation going. Hopefully, we're going to have more such conversations on this platform and many other platforms, just so that we can all, to the extent that it's possible, do what we can to make sure that we have at least decent spending patterns throughout the course of our lives.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think it's we'll get there. I think it's a long journey, but we will do our part and hoping that, many others will join the bandwagon. But to be great if we all kept the momentum.
Yeah.
Okay. Chileshe, it's been a pleasure and an honor having you on the show. To our audience, we had Chileshe Moono, economist, financial enthusiast, talking to us about the concept of life cycle hypothesis. And so remember to comment, like, and share, and more importantly, subscribe. So from us at Money and People Podcast, it's bye.